Hey guys, Kid here of Burn 1 with a new Weiss Schwarz video. So I'm trying this new video style out. This is going to be a video about the Weiss Schwarz card history, and we're going to be looking at a card or multiple cards that work in combination with each other that had a major impact in Weiss's history, mostly kind of looking at the competitive meta. So it's going to be mostly Neo Standard only. I might delve into Standard at some other time, but we're going to see how the reception for this video is. If you guys like this video and want more videos like this, make sure to comment and like and subscribe. That way I know I can just go off and just start making a bunch of these videos and you guys can have fun listening to them. So the first card or combination of cards here we're going to be looking at that had a great impact into Weiss is a card that a lot of people might be familiar with if you played Weiss during the era I played early on in like 2011-ish, 2010. I forget the exact date or exact year in this state, is this Angel Beats combination of cards. So Messenger of God Angel here is a 1/1 7500 beat stick. That's basically all it is. Has a great base power, and during that time frame of the meta, 7K vanillas was like the major power at that point. So a 7500 is already over the baseline of most cards that costed some kind of resource to be onto the field for that power level. And so to balance that out, they try to give it this demerit. And when I say balance, I'm kind of putting that in quotations because we're going to see how this way they balanced it didn't really balance out this card very well, in my opinion. So when this card comes into play from your hand, you reveal the top card of your deck. If that character is not a death trait character, at the beginning of your encore step, you put this card into your waiting room. So generally, if you looked at this card nowadays, this card looks like absolute trash if you look at the power level we are at now in Weiss. But back then, this card was insane because it was already over the base power level of most cards. So this is bigger than a 1/1 vanilla. And at the time, a lot of decks did not play 1/1 vanillas. One of the only other decks that I believe that played a vanilla like this was Zero no Sakaima, and that was because it had a very good support for the 1/7K it had. So the fact that this was already over the meta power level at the time made this like the standard of like you had to be able to at least beat this to be able to like win in these matchups or like have a good chance in these matchups to make it kind of fair. So the big quote unquote demerit of this card got kind of swept away because of this support, Kanade sending everyone off. So this card is a 1/0 support. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be a support, but most people just left it in the back row, obviously, because of the two effects, which is one, it gave all your death trait characters hand encore. So at any time they went to the rating room, you can just pitch a character and then bring that card back. That completely negates the demerit of the 1/1 Kanade. You do have to discard a card. I do admit that. But you'll see when I explain this, it wasn't that bad actually. And the second part has an act ability where you rest this card and give something 1000 power until the end of the turn. So now your 1/175s are already way bigger than normal beaters you're going to be dealing with at that power level. A lot of the times like 6/5 was a decent power range for most level ones, especially if they were costless is what you're looking at, because one of the big players at the time was the Modica set, which played the Apple Bonds combination of cards. So you would always have like vanillas that were 1065 essentially. So that was like the normal power level, I would say, or threshold most decks were trying to be around. This Angel Beats made it so that if you couldn't answer their board, they got infinite pluses for quite a while. And back then it was very hard to remove things like that or get power lines like that. So the fact that you were able to hand encore and ignore the demerit of the card, on top of like when your opponent has to spend extra resources or use a climax or something like that to get over that threshold of 7/5, and then all that did was really do nothing because now you are able to discard a card and bring back your 7/5 that they have to answer again the following turn. Makes it very awkward for your opponent to deal with, and gave you a lot of times you would just have multiple free pluses at level 1 and sometimes even at level 2 a lot of the times, just because of how powerful this card, the 1/1 Kanade, is in combination with this Kanade sending everyone off. The fact that this card also had the ability to rest itself to give something 1000 power made it so that your 7/5s offensively now, before any other power pumps, were 8/5s, meaning that 6/5s behind a 2K counter didn't do anything. And back then, 2K counters were somewhat rare, or actually really rare during this like time frame of Weiss. Most counters were just vanilla counters, 1-0, 1500 power pump. And nowadays that's like a joke. Like 1500 power pump off of a 1-0 is like non-existent in most Weiss sets. It's like the vanilla state now is 2K power. And so that meant that 1-0-6/5s could not compete against these 7/5s that got power pumped. On top of that, other sets that did have the ability to tap characters to give power, like usually required you to tap 2 characters. One in comparison to this card is a card in Hatsune Miku that gave 2000 power, but it required you to tap 2 characters. Of course, it was a level 0, so this one was a level 1, so you couldn't do it immediately. But the fact that you only had to rest this one card that you weren't going to do anything with anyway was very, very powerful. So now we're going to look at the combination of cards here. So this combination of cards was offensively and defensively super strong. So offensively, you got like at minimum 1 lane 8500 power. That's really hard to compete. Not a lot of decks could counter over that. So you were safe out of counter range like 90% of the time, probably, maybe even more. Defensively, 7/5 behind your own counters is really hard to deal with. So a lot of times people would be swinging into you and then you would just counter and they would just lose immediately after they spent resources to get over your power range. So a lot of decks back then didn't have the ability to just get such huge numbers, especially at level 1 like we do nowadays. So it made a lot of matchups somewhat lopsided, especially if like Angel Beats was able to present a board of multiple 1/1 Messengers of God Angel. That being said, because of the 1-0, the 1/1's downside, it was almost non-existent. So now this card that on play, like unlike all other cards, a lot of like on play cards would like require yourself to clock yourself, like that type of demerit, or the card would immediately go to waiting room. For some reason, this card waited till encore phase to get sent to waiting room, which meant even if you whiffed, you could still attack with a card and gain a resource. And because you revealed the top card of your deck, you now had trigger knowledge of what you're going to trigger first. And if you whiffed on this card and it was a climax that you whiffed on, now you know you could brainstorm and get some kind of value out of that, or even not brainstorm and just like trigger the door that you have on top of there to get a character back and then immediately hand encore this afterwards. So it made the deck super consistent. One of the most consistent level 1 games, I think, during that meta of Weiss. And then at the time too, there was not many strong removal tools that like you find nowadays. So there's no way to send this to memory, send this to waiting, or send this to clock, or send this to stock very easily. And a lot of times those type of removal tools during this early phase of Weiss, by removing it permanently into some other zone, usually gave your opponent some type of advantage. So a lot of times there were old cards, if you've ever read really old cards, that like they would send their reversed battle opponent to stock, right? But your opponent wouldn't have to take the bottom card of their stock out. They would just gain an extra stock for you sending it there. So that made it very hard for people to deal with because there was like 0 removal tools. And back then during the Weiss meta, the biggest thing, it's somewhat same nowadays, but I would say back then it was even more important, was that consistency is king. And what I mean by that is we didn't have as many utility tools as we do now. We didn't have like one card that did like 5 different utility things at level 0 for consistency. We were kind of left to our own devices with like, we were playing cards that are literally just only drop searchers. We would play tap 2 brainstorms, because back then tap self brainstorms were almost non-existent, if any. I think maybe there was only like 1 or 2 during this time, and they were on sets that like no one played, like King of Fighters or something like that. So the fact that like once you got this out, it was very consistent, it was hard to remove, and your opponent had to go very hard to be able to remove this. And in a lot of cases, your opponent dumping extra resources to hopefully like out you there can just get blown out by a counter. And even if they don't blow you out, they don't get blown out by a counter, you just hand encore this card and it came back. And now they had to deal again with their 7,500 wall they already had trouble dealing with, on top of the fact that when you're attacking into them, it's going to be 8/5 at least, which is insane. So during this time frame, Angel Beats, when this was out, was considered like one of the top meta decks. at the time. Obviously, I hope I kind of made that apparent with this. It was very tough for people to get through this combination of cards, and the fact that the set already had other good consistency tools, unlike other sets. So a card that is not in this video is Operation Tornado, which helped you get back a lot of your level 1s back to your hand. So you could play a low amount of like 1-0 Kanade, sending everyone off, and still have access with it by using that event. Meant that this combination of card was just super powerful, super consistent, and like you could always field like 2 1/1 Kanades like every game, and essentially get a plus both those lanes, or at least one of those lanes, you know, multiple turns in a row, which made it so that this deck could clock less in some scenarios and conserve more resources for their late game heal spam into like whatever finishing power they do use at the time. I kind of forget now what the main finisher was for the set back then, but a lot of finishers during that time frame were like on attack, cancel, burn 1 if is like the best you're gonna get. I think during this, Haruhi was like one of the best finishers because it was just Troubled Girl. Haruhi was on attack, your opponent takes an extra damage, which they burn 1. So back then that was like insane for quote unquote finishing power. A lot of people's way of finishing out the game was just a heal spam until your opponent lost the game slowly. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and kind of had a look at this combination of cards that was very powerful back then in Weiss, around the 2011 era of Weiss, if I remember the year correctly. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know that you like this video, and so I will produce more of these short form content to talk about you know, cards through the history of Weiss that really impacted the meta or Weiss in general. Hope to see you guys in the next video. Later, everyone.